Today's arguments are mostly going to be about nerfs. We are in yet another round of tuning for 11.2's PTR cycle, which has seen some significant nerfs for quite a few of our nice performing specs in the PTR. Now that, good timing now that the last set of mythic raid testing has ended on Friday. Now on Tuesday, before this weekly reset, we have another set of balance tuning for many of the specs. Most of these will be DPS specs being targeted. Now, funnily enough, one of the specs we have mentioned being in the top 5 of performers in our last video based on the PTR results. So we had BM Hunter, we had Shadow Priest, we had Balance Druid, we had Frost DK, and then Fire Mage. Frost DK was one of the ones that overall was doing towards the best of the results, isn't actually being changed. You do get buffs for Unholy. Technically, most of these are hotfixes, one of the many hotfixes that still need to go Unholy's way, especially, as usual, pet related, pet scaling related, and pet talents related, with Commander of the Dead still basically not working. This was basically an oversight. Legion of Souls is now replacing practically Army of the Dead. Army of the Dead gave you a Magus of the Dead, and Legion of Souls didn't. So now you have the Magus coming from Legion of Souls, and then multiple scaling buffs with Whitemane. You have the Reaping minion damage increase effect on Soul Reaper Explosion, now also increasing Whitemane's Undead. Your own Mastery now buffs the crit damage of Whitemane's Undead, and now they do some pretty good damage. It feels like Blizzard was pretty annoyed at Unholy DK's abandonment of pets and going for a completely basically almost petless build Sun Lane damage style. So now they have been buffing for a while, or hotfixing for a while, Rider of the Apocalypse, so the pet-based build of Unholy. Still, even after these changes, Unholy is behind Frost DK in damage, especially with Frost DK not receiving any nerfs. Who receives nerfs, though, is Balance Druid. We said this multiple times, that this was going to be nerfed. The question was how? How was this going to be nerfed? So the nerf in question is that the base max scaling of your 4-piece set bonus, so the damage you could store once your Dryad was summoned to then empower your next 2 Star Surges, was based on your max HP. 50% of your max HP was the max number that you would then add to your Star Surge as base damage. So in the PTR, at the fixed item level, you had like 12 million HP, so you could buff up the base damage of Star Surge by like 6 million. So you add this to the base damage. This has now been changed to no longer be based on 50% of your max health, but 50 times your base spell power. And this is a nerf. On top of this, in classic Blizzard fashion, they actually release the patch notes but don't add the extra tooltip changes that are already live, which is a further nerf to the 4-piece set bonus. Now, not only is the max damage you can store with Star Surge simply lower, but then now it is also going to store 3% of the damage you did in that window where the Dryad was active instead of 5%. And the splash AoE damage, which on release in the PTR was 100% of the damage was being splashed, then 20% of the damage was being splashed, now only 10% of the damage is being splashed. So that's the further nerf. The other nerf that wasn't being mentioned in these changes is that in your tier set for Druid, this buff, the buff of your Dryad expiring, after 10 seconds, this buff right here, when the Dryad fades, your next 2 Star Surges damage for an additional amount equal to 5% of the damage done while it was active. This lasted for 45 seconds. So because you have 2 charges of Celestial Alignment, you could activate the first CA, create this mega buff that empowered your Star Surges. Once Celestial Alignment ends, you don't Star Surge, you hold them, so that then you enter CA again, and you can dump these 2 mega empowered Star Surges in your next Celestial Alignment, which already spawned a new Dryad and is already starting to store a part of your damage. So now you can land these 2 mega hard hitting Star Surges immediately to store this damage very quickly. Now, this has been made very, very tricky because the buff lasts for 15 seconds. not for 45. So you don't have a 45-second window where you can hold these mega empower star surges to wait for a second CA. You only have 15 seconds. So it's worse. Basically, it's a nerf to Druid, it's a nerf to balance Druid. It's harder to figure out by how much, but it's definitely a significant nerf in the raid, especially in single target. Talking about nerfs, we haven't had our overview of the results in the raid, but one of the things we mentioned would have been up for nerfs was the set bonus of preservation, which actually goes away unscathed, because there is really no mention of preservation, or even still Flame Shaper that is performing very well for devastation as well. It's just buffs for Scale Commander, the weaker of the two hero talents for devastation. Back to more nerfs. Okay, technically survival is being buffed across the board. The pack leader changes for survival only are buffs, and the sentinel buffs also going the way of survival. However, what is more relevant here are the nerfs to the other one of the specs we mentioned doing well, which is BM. After marksmanship used to be the best one when we were looking at the heroic testing, and it was marksmanship ahead of BM, then marksmanship was nerfed, so players went to move and played BM, and now BM was OP, now BM is getting nerfed. So the nerf is that you get 3% less damage, your Stampede does 35% less damage, and your Huntmaster's Call got its bonuses nerfed. Hati and Fenrir that you summon every 6 Dire Beast procs, they now last for 10 seconds instead of 15. You get 4% haste from Fenrir instead of 8%, and Hati pet damage buff is now 4% instead of 8. So it's nerfed by like 50% here. So it's a significant nerf to Huntmaster's Call on top of your tier set nerf, on top of a flat 3% nerf for BM. This is, expected. We mentioned BM was overperforming, and we mentioned how much of it also was synergizing around the value of your Dire Beast and your entire line of Dire Beast buffs ending with Huntmaster's Call, because of how much more value you can gain now from this, because summoning a Dire Beast is based on your bleed effects. So the more bleeds, the more summons of your Huntmaster's Call proc. And you're like, well, I don't know much about BM, but they have like one bleed, right? It's Barb Shot. That's the one bleed chance they have to summon their Dire Beasts. Well, no, because whenever your pets crit, which is all the time, they also leave behind a dot. Also, because you're playing Pack Leader, one of your beasts from the Pack Leader buff is the Bear, which is going to put a Rend Flesh 10-second bleed on the target. Also, Huntmaster's Call itself, so Fenrir, summoned by Huntmaster's Call, with the Ravenous Sleep is going to add an extra bleed on the target. On top of that, because now with your 11.2 compared to live, where your bloodshed was in this unfortunate, terrible position, now in 11.2 is practically free real estate. It's extremely easy to take, which is also a 12-second bleed with increased chances to summon Dire Beasts. So you went to have like 5 different bleeds as BM now, which is a massively increased uptime of your Huntmaster's Call procs. You can see here from the buffs of this BM. If you look for Huntmaster's Call, that's a 71% uptime with that's basically the stacks, going higher and higher to when you can actually proc the effect. It was very high for BM. And then the damage of Stampede itself being nerfed. Again, this has been already nerfed by like 50%, and now another 35% nerf for BM. So this is another significant set of nerfs for BM. It's more hurtful in single target than it is in AoE. Beastmaster is still doing quite well after these nerfs in Mythic Plus in AoE, but it was necessary. We mentioned this one being necessary, and it happened. What we didn't mention being necessary, although we did say it was doing well, but we didn't say it was doing like super well. We did mention what was happening. We mentioned that when you were playing Frostfire, you had the Glacial Spike and Comet Storm now being over 20% of your damage as a Fire Mage, and why this was so good. When the average Pyro does 1 million damage and the average Comet Storm does 27 million, it means that every time you proc Comet Storm, which is just from casting Meteor, every every Comet Storm is worth 27 Pyroblasts worth of damage. What made this even more, crazy good for Frostfire Mage was the fact that, as you can see here, Comet Storm now benefits from Ignite, now apply Ignite, at 150% effectiveness. So this means, very simply, that while these 1 million damage pyros apply a 1-to-1 ratio of Ignite, these would apply 50% extra value of Ignite compared to this pyro. So not only was Comet Storm worth 27 pyros worth of damage, it was also worth 41 pyros worth of Ignite value. The amount of actual Ignite that you would transfer from this damage to this was worth 41 pyros. You can see, even in this 5.5 minute fight, you cast 160 pyros. This means that in four casts of Meteor, you generated the same value of 162 pyros worth of Ignite, because of how much damage this was doing and the 150% better, stronger effectiveness of Ignite. This is nerfed. All of this is nerfed. Ignite effectiveness is now down to 100%, no longer 150%. Also, Frostfire Burst, Ice Nova, and Comet Storm damage is being reduced down to 20% instead of 30%, and Glacial Spike damage is now reduced by 20%. So, back to our damage over here. This is nerfed by 20%, so it's a 1% damage nerf. This is nerfed by 10%, so it's another 1.8% damage nerf. Then this value turning into Ignite is no longer 150% of this benefiting into Ignite, but only 100% of this benefiting into the Ignite value. This is very relevant because now this has made Frostfire Mage dead for fire. It's relevant because this comes after the Sun Fury nerfs for fire, which is why Fire Mages went into Frostfire to begin with, and now Frostfire is being nerfed. At this moment, both of the talent options for Fire are almost 10% behind the counterparts of Arcane and Frostmage, which are both playing with Spellslinger. So basically Fire at the moment is completely dead on arrival when it comes to raid, when it comes to single target, no chance. They were still very powerful in Mythic Plus because of the value of being able to land such huge single target ignites and then spread them in Mythic Plus. But in the raid, this is just making Fire unplayable. These changes for Frost and Arcane were already in the game. This one was already in the game. This one was already in the game. This is a slight nerf. Doesn't matter. Spellslinger is still the best option right now for both of these specs anyways. So for now, we have reached the large nerfs to Balance Druid, the large nerfs to BM, and the large nerfs for Fire Mage. It's a bit spooky. These were, 3 of the 5 best performing specs we were mentioning, 1, 2, and 3. And, this has already been nerfed anyways. So the only remaining ones are Frost Decay, which has gone away, unnerfed, and now Shadow Priest. Spoiler, Shadow Priest has not been nerfed whatsoever, so we can skip that already. Who is being buffed, it's irrelevant because it is still bad, is Master of Harmony for monks. Now, the actual important change for monk is Mistweaver. Not this is irrelevant. Shenun's Gift is terrible in the raid, it's okay in terms of healing in Mythic Plus. The big one is this. Chi Harmony now increases the healing taken on players by 25% instead of 50%. Chi Harmony is the buff you get on the first 8 seconds of Renewing Mist. For the first 8 seconds, the targets take 50% more healing, which is very big. It's very big, especially in Mythic Plus, because you only have 5 targets. It's easier to guarantee that the 3 DPS, for example, and yourself have these 8-second increase healing, 50% increase healing, so you can have some massive heal windows as Mistweaver. In the raid, it was still the best option over Lotus Infusion, but not like nearly as good. The value of this, of course, is the fact that when you use Mana Tea, after Mana Tea you have a 30% mana cost discount. When you enter Yulon, you have a 50% mana cost discount on your Enveloping Mist, and when you cast Enveloping Mist, you apply Renewing Mist for 6 seconds on an ally. So if I Renewing Mist myself, I will also get 6 seconds of Enveloping Mist, which is buffed by Chi Harmony, right? So the whole playstyle, considering how you are stacking haste and how you play with things like Secret Infusion to give you 15% more haste after you Enveloping Mist, for example, you were stacked with haste, you get into Yulon, you spam like 5 or 6 different Enveloping Mist on a bunch of different players, they all get this 50% heal increase, you extend the duration, because it's very short, right? It's only 6 seconds. If you're casting this 5 times, you barely have any time left to then heal players with this heal increase. That's where Rising Mist came into play. Using your kick, your rushing wing kick, extends the duration of both of these two on every players by 4 seconds. So you can see here that if I put it on myself and then I kick and then I kick again, the duration keeps extending, right? That's how you keep this buff up. And once this buff was up and it was spread to a bunch of different players, because you yourself already have 3 different charges of Renewing Mist you could put out, right? Plus the spreading of Renewing Mists of your Enveloping Mist. You could have like 10, 15 different Enveloping Mist out on a bunch of players. More than like half of those were empowered by this buff, and then you would heal. You would land more of your kicks, more of your instacast, empowered Vivifies with Vivacious Vivification, buffed by Zemples as well, tons of healing. And this is nerfed now. The heal increase is now only 25% instead of 50%. Now, where you get the healing back to the point where it's borderline neutral is Vivify direct healing is now flat out buffed by 80%. So this part here of Vivify is now 80% stronger, so it's a borderline 4.5 to 5% more healing flat thanks to Vivify. So even though this is not technically like a proper full nerf, the only danger is bringing back Mistweaver to the Stone Age of being a Vivify spam bot like Dragonflight days. This is a possibility with how much more powerful Vivify has been made. But, you know, it's still not a flat-out nerf from the nerf of Chi Harmony now that Vivify has also been buffed by this much. Talking about buffs, though, we are done, because this basically can't even be considered a buff. Lesser weapon healing increased by 100%. You barely do any healing with it anyways. The relevant one is the lesser weapon damage reduced by 66%. This is relevant because lesser weapon damage for Prot Paladin was the by far largest source of your damage, which is now nerfed by 66%, which is a 13% damage nerf to Prot. That's what it is. Yes, you do have the compensation. You do have the compensation in the fact that now your lesser bulwark, your absorb created by your weapons, is also increased by 100%. So you at the very least, you are trading 13% of your Prot Paladin damage for doubling this value, this absorb shield value for Prot Paladin. As mentioned, the healing buff of this is irrelevant. It's much more relevant the doubling of the absorb value and also the massive nerfing of the actual damage of your lesser weapon. However, the nerfs don't end here for the damage of Prot Paladin, which, you know, to be fair, we haven't mentioned it yet in the PTR, but Prot Paladin did have the largest damage of the tanks. You also get a nerf to Hammer and Anvil damage, because now from your tier set, your Prot Paladin's tier set does have the Hammer and Anvil's damage increase, and it can also be activated by Blessed Hammer at 100% effectiveness. Now, the activation is only at 40% effectiveness. That's a further damage nerf to Prot Paladin. So heavily hit in your damage, actually buffed in your tankiness from doubling your absorb value of your Lightsmith build. And yes, unfortunately, talking about things we were expecting in terms of buffs, Holy Paladin is not receiving anything. This as mentioned, first of all, Holy Paladin wasn't playing Lightsmith in the raid, so this is irrelevant. Second of all, the healing increase of this is irrelevant anyways. So Holy Paladin does go missing in terms of changes. Last of the relevant changes is to mostly Protection Warrior, really. Colossus and Montantain are more relevant changes for Prot. So Very annoying thing when Blizzard does this. So Blizzard thought, okay, what if we give you an alternative to constantly, being based on ignore pain and ignore pain value, and it gave you something else, like Fueled by Violence. You are healed for 110% of the damage dealt by deep wounds. In the PTR for the next season, this was buffed to 200%. So 200% more, or rather 200% healing based on your deep wounds damage. Now this went much higher value in terms of effectiveness because of your tier set when playing Warrior, specifically when playing Colossus Warrior. Why? Demolish increases the critical strike chance of your next 2 Shield Slam, blah blah blah, but more importantly, your Shield Slam crits increase your rend and deep wounds damage by 100%. And because your next 2 Shield Slams are guaranteed crit, you can Shield Slam crit once, wait 8 seconds for the buff, and then Shield Slam guaranteed crit again to extend this up to 16 seconds. And this is just doubling the damage of your deep wounds. So first, you have this one buffed from 110% healing to 200% healing based on the damage, and then the damage itself of deep wounds is doubled when you're playing Colossus. And the result when playing Colossus is that your healing looks like this. Fueled by Violence had this much of a value. So the first nerf is that Fueled by Violence heals you for 150% of the damage dealt by deep wounds instead of the original 200. This, as I mentioned, is annoying because the value of a tier set is forcing the nerf of one of your talents, which should be the other way around. If a talent and the tier set are too powerful and synergizing together, you should just nerf the tier set, not nerf the actual value of the talent. Because what if Mountain Prot Warrior wanted to play with this talent? Mountain doesn't have this double damage value of deep wounds, so there was no need to go and nerf this for Mountain. So you now nerfed a talent which was only used by one of the 2 hero talents, and only because you're tier set. So it's just a poor way of nerfing a certain powerful tool for Prot Warrior. Now, besides this, though, Colossus right now is pretty much untestable because it's bugged. So they did nerf the critical strikes with Mortal and Shield Slam, increase the damage, blah, 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 blah. The problem is that right now the bug is that this doesn't end. The critical strike guaranteed of Shield Slam doesn't end after the first 2. It just continues for the duration of the buff. So you can just continue to slam your slams to be guaranteed crits. So waiting for this bug fix to come in. The buff is to Mountain. So the original 4-piece of Mountain was awful. It was ionizing strikes dealing 50% more damage, and they have a 20% chance to give you a charge of Thunderblast. Now, the damage increase of ionizing strikes is 100%, not 50. And when you trigger them, you gain a charge of Thunderblast. So not you have a 20% chance, you have a 100% chance to gain a charge of Thunderblast. And it's not just a charge of Thunderblast, it's a charge of Thunderblast that does 100% more damage. So basically this is a massive damage increase to Mountain. Now it is matching, if not passing, Colossus in terms of damage in Mythic class. As I said, it's harder to gauge because Colossus right now is bugged, but significantly increased the damage done of Mountain with this change. It's funny. Originally, one of the nerfs to Prot Warrior was to nerf Ignore Pain and increase the rage costs of all of your kit, with the excuse being, we don't want you to overflow in rage, so you feel compelled to spam your rage, to dump your rage in Ignore Pain. And now they changed this 4-piece to give you an absolutely ungodly amount of rage generation because of the amount of times you will reset your Thunderclap empowered into Thunderblast for more and more rage generation. So it's pretty funny. We are getting back there anyways with this buff to Mountain. However, this was the last of the list in terms of changes. As mentioned, there have been quite a few significant nerfs across the list. Pretty much we have struck down many of the best performing DPS in the PTR when it comes to the raid. Fire Mage, Marksmanship Hunter last patch, BM Hunter this patch, Balanced Druid, Shadow Priest was nerfed last patch as well. So quite a large list of nerfs. Funnily enough, no changes whatsoever to healers. We haven't had our video related to the results of healers, but what we were expecting were nerfs to these 3, especially these 2, and we basically haven't really gotten any. Not nearly as heavy on the buffs this time around. We have gotten decent QOL, continued QOL for Unholy, and, you know, buffs to the more underplayed hero talents, which are still far away from being playable. So this doesn't even matter as a buff, as long as it's not for a relevant and playable hero talent. So pretty much a nerf changes reset on this set of tuning for the PTR. So of course there is still like 4 actually different resets before we even get into the next season, so there is plenty of time and room for more balancing, but this is what we have for today. So on this Tuesday, on the eve of another weekly reset, we can now leave each other. We're starting the goodbyes as usual by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who's been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, yeah, well, it was good while it lasted. It was like 10 days of chill air, clouds, nice temperature. Now we are back. We are back sweating.